Napoli fans around the world, welcome to Napoli Talk. Breaking news yesterday, the European Commission has said that if any club or entity wants to create a separate European league, then UEFA and FIFA have no right to block that from happening. And this created a divide, a civil war in football once again, where fans and clubs are choosing whether to go to the good side or the bad side. And on this bad side, unfortunately, we might just find Napoli there, because De Laurentiis is of the idea that football is for the elite. Football is a closed shop because he is now at the top and he wants to make sure that he is protected and he stays there. So I am against the idea of the Super League, but let's see what De Laurentiis says about it. Let's see what he says also about a Serie E in Italy, a Serie Elite, which he proposes. All this in an exclusive interview here that I'm going to be reading out the best parts, commenting on them, and then a little bit about Mercato as well at the end of the video. So let's start with what he says. He says, football so far has been governed by people that have no understanding on how to run a business and how to grow a business. It's something that I've been saying since 2013, that we need to change the way that European competitions work. The way the money is distributed is not fair because the majority of it stays in the hands of UEFA. But when the first Super League was announced, it did not convince me because there was absolutely no level of meritocracy, whereas this one is already better. Now, there is a little bit of a promotion and relegation system in the Super League, with 2 teams going up and down if you're in the top 2 levels and 20 going up and down in the bottom level. But it completely eliminates the ability for a team like Leicester or Bologna to have one great season and then get the reward to play the likes of Real Madrid, because even if they were to win a Scudetto, they would go to the bottom tier of this pyramid. So their reward would be playing against some random team in Estonia, even though they're the best team in Italy in this hypothetical scenario. So it completely takes away the ability of a team to get rewarded for their domestic success. And also, if you are a team then like Bologna, for example, you know that you would need 3 to 4 very consistent, very good seasons before you even get a sniff of playing at the elite level. And let's face it, that's nearly impossible to achieve. So effectively, it is a bit of a closed shop. For the teams that are in the top 2 brackets, they are quite well protected. They have a very low chance of getting relegated. It's a really bad competition, in my opinion. It completely devalues the domestic leagues, and I'm totally against it. But De Laurentiis says it's needed because it's going to make clubs grow. And he is of the opinion that we have been too many years and for too long been held back by smaller clubs that have an equal say in where football is going, although they are not the ones that are bringing money to the table. He says the moment that we allow a voting system which enables those that make the most money to have the most say, then that's when football will go ahead and move forward. The smaller teams only care about avoiding relegation, and that means that they are not taking risks, and we are not able to take risks with the changes that we want to introduce in football. He then continues to say that he is one of the few, if not only, real entrepreneur in Italy, because, for example, the Milan owners, Redbird, they're always in America. The Roma owners as well. He says, I wish to see them one day in Italy instead of Los Angeles. Inter owners, we don't even know who they are, obviously referring to the fact that Inter has so many debts that although Zhang is officially the owner, at this point he's just a figurehead because he owes so much money to other people that effectively all these other people are maybe the true owners of Inter at the moment. And then you've got guys like Lotito, who is in charge of kind of organizing the presidents in the Serie, and De Laurentiis is saying this guy has absolutely no idea what he's doing. He doesn't know what it means to create content for the younger generation, content that's dynamic, that's appealing. Whereas he says, I come from a cinematic background. I know what it means to make engaging content, and we need people that are entrepreneurs to be deciding the future of football. And that's why him and Florentino Perez want to make a board of presidents where not every president is invited onto this board, but just those presidents that have shown entrepreneurship, that have shown vision. So although you may be a team invited to the Super League because you have a rich history and you're a strong team, that doesn't guarantee that that club's president makes it onto the board, because he wants the people to decide to be ones with vision. And his vision for domestic football is actually to create a new league within Italy called La Serie E, which stands for Serie Elite, which is a 14-team league that only has teams from Italy's major cities. And that includes inviting some of the teams in Serie B that have big fan bases, such as Bari and Palermo. Obviously, there is no bias nor personal interest here at all, right? But what he's saying is that it's a shame for teams to be in Serie A, such as Frosinone, Udinese, Empoli, and you see that half of their stadium is empty because these are teams that only have like 10,000 people that follow them, whereas you've got guys like Palermo and Bari that have humongous stadiums, 40,000, 50,000 seats that would fill them every single week, playing in Serie B or sometimes even worse, Serie C and Serie D. Bring those people, those clubs into an elite league and always have big cities face each other. And obviously this would be a closed league, which basically means that he wants to turn domestic Serie A football into what the NBA is or what Formula One is, which is these are the teams, there's no relegation, there's no promotion, just big players facing each other, and we grow revenues and split that just between us and then everybody else. If you're a team from a small town, you basically don't get a chance to play against us. You got to make your own league, and you are effectively just a feeder system into these big clubs. Football, though, has never been about that. Football has always been for the people. It's always been about the big guy versus the small guy, and the small guy dreaming of one day pulling off an incredible journey, an incredible story, like, for example, Leicester did. And it makes football the greatest sport in the world. The fact that, yes, Napoli could lose 4-0 against a team like Frosinone, I mean, that is a story. It's not a good story for us. I don't want that to happen. But the fact that it can happen makes me love the game. Because if it can happen to me, it can happen to Inter, to Milan and Juve, and the day that it happens to them, I will be there to celebrate that. If you remove that aspect of football, if you remove the ability for people to dream of these types of moments, then I think you haven't understood the content that you're trying to push out there. Next, De Laurentiis talks about managers and players, and he starts off by saying that he wanted Thiago Motta, but Thiago Motta refused because he didn't want to burn himself going right after Spalletti, because obviously the bar was set super high. Thiago Motta, on the other hand, before has stated that he didn't accept Napoli, not necessarily because of that, but because at the time that De Laurentiis approached him, Napoli didn't have a sporting director. And when Thiago Motta said, okay, so who's making the signings, who's doing everything, De Laurentiis said, don't worry, I got it. And Thiago Motta was like, well, that's not how a club should be run, so I'm not going there. And he was right. This is not how to run a club. You need a valid sporting director. You need a project that is outlined by the sporting director and brings a bridge between the president, the players, and the coach. We didn't have any of that this year. Yes, we have Meluso, but Meluso does not have that kind of weight in the club that a true sporting director would have, like Giuntoli had. Then he says, I spoke to Luis Enrique and Nagelsmann, but they wanted too much money. So ultimately, we went with Garcia. And he says, I should have realized that he wasn't the man for the job, and I should have sacked him the day that we made the presentation when he said that he hadn't watched Napoli play. And my guy, De Laurentiis, man, you said on that presentation day that you chose Garcia because after speaking with all these different coaches and with Garcia for about 10 days, you were aligned with his vision. What were you discussing in those 10 days that you had to discover on his presentation day that he hadn't watched last season's team? Something is not adding up. Then he goes on to say that it's because of Garcia that he had to fire the athletic preparation coach guy, because Garcia wanted to bring in his own, and that was a mistake, and we brought in a new guy who's completely useless. And this is something that De Laurentiis can't just say, oh, it was Garcia, it's all his fault, he made me do all these bad decisions, he made me fire this guy and that guy. I mean, that is not how you run a business. That is not how you have vision. If you are the owner, you got to know what you're doing when you hire and fire people. You're responsible for that area. And you can't blame something like that on Garcia. That's way too easy. That was his decision, and he made that. Yes, maybe Garcia told him, this is my opinion about it, but ultimately the buck stops with De Laurentiis. Then he goes and talks about the transfer market, and he says, we have to buy 3, maybe 4 players, 1 right back to have as a replacement for Di Lorenzo, which basically means that Zanoli is either getting sold or is going away on loan, which is a bit of a shame, because if we are really not going to be using Zanoli, why didn't we just accept the 10 million euro offer that was there for him this summer? Then he says we need a center back, which is the hardest position to go out and buy. So clearly he understood that we can't be relying on a guy like Juan Jesus for much longer, even though he renovated Juan Jesus only a few months ago for another 2 years. And then he says we also need a midfielder or maybe 2. And at the same time confirms that Edmans is leaving. He says 100% Edmans is sold. He says he is someone that always wants to play. He hasn't understood that you can be a very important player even if you don't play the 90 minutes, which is true. You can be a very important super sub, but ultimately for a kid who's 24 and has been in the club for 4 years, it's normal that your ambition is to want to be not just an important member of the team, but a key member of the team. And you want to be playing as many minutes as possible because you're young, because you still feel like you can grow if you have more time on the field. And there are games that Edmans doesn't even come off the bench. So it's totally understandable that he wants something different. He's already won the Scudetto. It's now time for him to spread his wings, and I would be making the same decision if I was Edmans. He is too good of a player to be sitting on the bench. It's just not our level, because players can accept that if they play for City or Real Madrid. But if you play for a team like Napoli, then if you're a good player, you expect to be starting games. And regarding Zielinski, De Laurentiis says Zielinski said that he wants to stay, but between saying something and doing something, there's a bit of a gap. Maybe because he's from Poland, he's not so used to the sea and the sun. Maybe he's more used to the fog, referring to rumors that Zielinski might move to Inter Milan, where obviously there's a little bit more fog than in Naples. But that is such a lack of respect to a guy that is in our top 10 of most appearances, has been with us for something like 8 seasons, is one of the players that I think, yes, he might not be consistent, but he's always giving it his best. He was one of our best players at the start of this season for the first 10 or so games. Without him and Politano, we would have been even further down in the league. And you could tell what it meant to him when we scored that goal in the final minute against Juventus last year, and he finally realized that he achieved his dream of winning a Scudetto with Napoli. I mean, Zielinski is more Neapolitan than De Laurentiis himself. So to say something like that is just such a lack of respect. Once again, it's not how an owner and a boss should be talking about his employees. What's clear to me is that if Edmans and Zielinski leave, then Napoli has failed the midfield generational turnover, because Gaetano and Edmans should have been 2 players that Napoli should have allowed the chance to flourish and grow in order to replace guys like Zielinski. If we sell Zielinski and we don't keep Edmans, but we sell him, then it means that we failed with Edmans. And even if we do keep Gaetano, I feel like we failed with Gaetano as well, because he is no longer a kid. He is 24, and the only time on the field that he gets is against Frosinone in the Coppa Italia. We cannot rely on a guy like Gaetano to move forward. And so all of a sudden, now De Laurentiis realizes that he needs to buy 2 midfielders, because what he has invested before has not produced them a new Napoli starter for that midfield. Anyways, guys, it's clear that there are so many problems on and off the field for Napoli. Off the field, De Laurentiis is making a lot of enemies, also a lot of friends if you are considering his friendship with Florentino Perez. Unfortunately, we are in a situation that is very, very dark at the moment, and we as fans are the ones that are ultimately going to be suffering the most. And so unfortunately, with that message, I'm gonna end the video here. Thanks a lot if you made it to the end. Subscribe if you haven't, smash that like button if you haven't, and as always, Forza Napoli sempre. Ciao.